for most people, it's not very obvious what kind of positive, meaningful outcomes can come out of a discussion of people representing so many different walks of life. What's the value of an event like that for you?
Well, first of all, this is my second event because I was in October in Krakow last year. And
the fact alone that you come again.
Yes, yeah, thank you for inviting me, and this time as a speaker, yeah. And I think like any such an event, it's the most important is, well, it's a cliche phrase to say about networking, but actually it's meeting discussions and aligning opinions and exchanging opinions and definitions, because in our field, in our domain, we use so many terms, and terminology is so diverse that even at the national level or between two professionals, we don't agree on that. So what is cyber defense? According to some, this is just protect the military networks. Some others now, they say if we have the cyberspace as a fifth domain, and cyber defense is actually the same way like we defend other physical domains, and this is part of the national sovereignty or collective security, as it is NATO or European Union, and which will oblige us to extend cyber defense to any systems of national security value, which means critical infrastructure then. But now what is critical infrastructure? In fake news or media, is that critical or not? And it becomes, yes, opinion. Exactly. So we have to change and this evolution of terminology and not just definitions, but understanding of that, because the definition is sometimes very formal. What's behind the definition is exactly the explanation, how do we treat it, the use cases and scenarios or examples, and those are the most valuable, let's say, outcomes of the meeting like that.
From the Ministry of Defense perspective, you're pretty much used to watching the reality around you more carefully than an average street goer, certainly. But my question is that the case, possibly, that while some nations have been extremely busy understanding and weaponizing the potential of cyber technologies, other nations have been dozing off? Is it still the case, or was it ever the case?
Yeah, well, I think it's always the case that some nations are lagging behind in some areas or underestimating the value of something, because this requires also huge investment, and to the contrary of many other defense areas, or where technology or where let's say the military or the defense system is procuring the technology or solutions. In the cyber field, the majority first of expertise is in the industry or academia or freelancers, even the ethical hackers or the gray guys. I wouldn't say bad guys, and the point is how you can engage them and really build scenarios or build capabilities that will help the nation or the country or different sector or the defense itself in the case of emergency, because you cannot always predict or assess what type of threats you have or what type of attack you'll get at the end of the day. As I mentioned, cyber defense in a broader aspect like the national security or collective security would require us first to prepare for the threats, vulnerabilities that we know, or type of attacks that we know. So we have something known, but also we have to prepare for the unknown. And the way to prepare for the unknown is to build resilience instead of just building a fortress or a firewall. Because and both things, they have to be balanced in a way, because if you are very weak, as you said, some nations really neglect that part or lag behind. If you're weak, you will be killed by the simplest virus. I mean, if you have these basic capabilities or defense or cyber hygiene, you call it, or something, some measures like that to protect yourself, then you can build or you can focus a bit more on the resilience of your systems, because resilience, to the contrary of the security, you cannot add to the system. So you have to design them like this, which simply means that we have to design our new systems, like industry control systems and weapon control systems and everything, to be resilient, so to protect against the unknown.
One of the greatest ironies of cyber attacks in general is that the more powerful and the more effective it is, the more silent it is, unlike conventional warfare. Now, I would like to relate this question to the situation in Bulgaria at the outset of its presidency. Would you describe Bulgarian society as highly aware of the types of threats they can expect in cyberspace, or do you see there's a massive challenge there as well?
Well, I wouldn't say it's highly aware, but at least for the last years, we raised a lot of this awareness. 3 years ago, we experienced very severe DDoS, distributed denial of service attack, during the elections, local elections we used to have. And the purpose of that attack was more than 20 governmental websites, including the Central Election Committee, the government itself, the presidency. And a part of or according to us, the main reason or the goal of this attack was to discredit the electronic systems, because in parallel to the elections, there was a referendum on e-voting that was initiated by the previous president, not the current one, of the Republic, and maybe that really had impact on, let's say, 20-30% of the voters that didn't participate in the referendum. But this showed actually how dependent, how fragile we are with that, and a lot of civil activities were also affected by that. So people, well, you know, the reaction was somewhere between the jokes they were making and a very serious attention to that, and they say, okay, this is something that we have to take care, because we used to have a lot of e-services, and they're expanding, especially for the business, e-government services or e-administration. And we use our money in the bank, or we control our money in the bank mainly electronically. And majority of people do that actually, so do transaction, e-commerce or buying in shops and something. And last but not least, the e-health services and the new things like media. So all this is already, people have the sense on that, and they start, let's say, having critical attitude towards everything which is happening in internet. I wouldn't say this is fear. It is more informed about the threats there.
Perhaps it's partly explained by the fact that we live in the age where impressions are very often more important than facts, creating those impressions through the use of fake news or spreading certain narratives along specific networks of stakeholders can have a much more powerful impact on the electoral process itself, for instance. But it's quite amazing, isn't it, that over the last 2 years we've heard all of a sudden huge numbers of electoral processes being meddled with. Is that the case, or it's always been there, it's just that we haven't seen it that much?
Well, I wouldn't say it has always been there. I mean, manipulation of media, that was always a target, and we had this information war since ages. However, now, well, first of all, about the truth and the authority which can bring you the reliable news, for example, on internet. People do not have this sense, and I believe that we are not contributing too much building trustful media or information sources, because as a national coordinator I was speaking a lot to the media in Bulgaria and also around the elections, because we ran 3 election campaigns while I was a coordinator, and try to really establish this kind of trusted information sources, especially around the elections, so people, but also the other media, to be able to read from one single source, which is really the reliable source, either a governmental or the press office of the Prime Minister or the Central Election Committee, and try to build this culture. But on the other hand, there are clear fake news, and there are hidden or kind of manipulative news yes. And actually, what we call like yellow press and something like that, and this media, which covers mainly scandals, and I had with my students even this kind of theorem, that it was informal theorem, that was showing them is that fake news, they have a better chance to go on the first page of Google because of the mechanism that was done. I mean, the referencing mechanism.
The viral effect also.
Exactly, and that was true. In fact, this combined with the fact that many people, when you ask them something, they search on Google, and if they don't find it on the first page, I mean, they barely go to the second page. So what is on the first page of Google, this is the truth for them. So as you said, this is the fact for them, because it is written on internet, and they don't even care about the agency or the source where it come from, and they read the blogs, and in the blogs the anonymity gives a chance to a lot of people, the so-called trolls, to manipulate the public opinion actually directly, because they simulate a dialogue, and these are scenarios that people, even if they don't believe or they have a kind of suspicious attitude towards what is there, because they know it might be wrong, they still read it.